All right, hello everybody. So we're going to do kind of the quick version of focus notes number 4. Here's our agenda for today. Focus notes number 4. We'll go through and talk about influences on voters, and then you're going to have the rest of the time to work on the voting trends assignment. And you see that posted for Friday. Good thing about me on video is that you can fast forward or pause if you need to pause. So focus notes number 4, what influences how a person votes? That's our first part. So I'm trying to think about what are the different influences that shape how people vote. When we talked about socialization, we said that a person's family has an influence on the way they vote. We could say that other aspects of one's personal background could influence the way they vote. So how old they are, the job they have, how much money they make, how much education they have. Any and all of those things might have an influence on the way people vote. Today, when we look at the assignment part of today, we're going to look at voting trends, and you're going to notice that you can definitely see, racial groups tend to vote in certain ways, age groups tend to vote in certain ways, gender groups tend to vote in certain ways. So if you know those trends, you can make some guesses. But the second bullet says people don't always vote the way their backgrounds might lead one to believe, meaning that sometimes you might guess, well, since you're an old white guy and old white guys tend to be more conservative and vote Republican, that person might be a very liberal Democrat, or vice versa with other groups. Cross-pressured voters are people that are caught between different elements of their personal background. So their income might put them into one group that you would guess they'd vote a certain way. Their race might put them into another group where you guess they'd vote a different way. And those are the cross pressures that their background is kind of leading them to two different paths. Second thing that influences voting is voting patterns or trends is loyalty to political parties. When we think about this, there are people that we would say are strong party voters and people that we would say are weak party voters. Strong party voters are people that tend to be more straight party ticket types, meaning that if you're a Republican, you always vote Republican and it really doesn't matter who the specific candidates are. Weak party voters tend to be more independent. They will sometimes vote Republican, sometimes vote Democrat. It kind of depends on the individual candidates. It might depend on just what year it is and what's going on at that time. So some people more loyal than others is what we're drawing from this. Third impact on how people vote, we would say certain issues that pop up. There are particular issues for some people that have a greater impact in their personal lives, and it doesn't matter what else is going on, they're going to vote on that one particular issue, and that's going to drive who they vote for. We used to have a secretary in our office who was a pretty conservative Catholic. She was very religious, and her big issue was abortion, and she was a pro-life voter, and it really didn't matter who was running, whether she liked that person or not. If they were pro-life, that's who she was voting for. So you'll see this show up sometimes in things like environmental issues, or sometimes around immigration issues, or sometimes about LGBTQ issues, and people are going to vote a particular way because of that one issue. Last one that has an influence on the way people vote is a candidate's image. Sometimes the way people perceive the candidate has as much importance as the particular issues that are involved. So it says here, if an example is if people think Obama is handling the economy well, then he might be reelected because people perceive that he's doing a good job with the economy. Right now, we're in the opposite situation. The economy is not great, and people might blame that on Biden, whether or not Biden had anything to do with the problems in the economy right now. The other part of this, though, is just the way that candidates portray themselves. We used to talk about presidential candidates having what was called presidential qualities, and how people thought of that person as presidential or not. and it turns out that maybe is less of an issue anymore. I feel like our last president did not always present in traditional ways, and so then this thing about perception of candidates and the image that they put across. There seems to be a trend right now in politics that people almost want to be portrayed as not like a politician, not like a normal politician, and that's actually something. You can look at some different examples here. The iconic Obama poster went from his campaign. George W. Bush on the right side, he was pretty famous for putting on the flight suit and giving before he gave a speech, and people thought that he looked, I guess, very masculine in this suit. Al Gore on the left ran against George Bush in 2000. Was trying to portray himself as more masculine, and so they were having him in denim shirts and things like that, not just suits all the time. So image plays a role. Oh, I lied. There's one more. The last influence on voters is propaganda, which we can define as using ideas, information, or rumors to influence voters' opinions. And sometimes it's not that they're lying to us, but they're not giving us the full truth either. And you can pause and read through this example if you'd like. But that's kind of a purposeful, the purposeful attempt to try to influence the way we think about the candidate, good, bad, or otherwise. Second half of this for our notes is really thinking about who votes and what impacts voter turnout. And this is connecting back to some of the stuff we saw in the videos at the beginning of the unit. So just some basics, and this will be a good lead into the assignment that we have for today. We look at overall voter turnout. The numbers are not great. We saw that in the video. They said the U.S. average is like 57% or something like that. Lots of people who can vote that don't vote, and that is kind of depends on the election, how close the election is. You'll get more voters if it's a close race, but even still, voter turnout overall is low. If you look at certain states, though, some states do quite a bit better than other states. Minnesota, notice number one on the list. We tend to be always in the top few states in terms of turnout. If you look at some of the states on the bottom of the list, they're getting into the 50% range in here. So that tells us something. Maybe the part of the country they live in and how education works in those places might have an impact. When we look at non-presidential elections, known as midterm elections, the voter turnout's even worse. So if we average somewhere in the 50% range for presidential elections, it drops down even lower for midterms. So that's just when people in Congress and governors are running. Regular voters tend to have more positive attitudes about government and about citizenship. They also tend to have higher levels of education. Regular voters also, not only do they have positive attitudes, but the more money that people make, the more likely they are to show up to vote. So again, one of the arguments that I'm making is that people that are lower in income, underrepresented if they're not voting. People that are younger in age that are not voting are underrepresented. If we want our system to work, we need to get everybody to show up and participate. We already know about age. Middle-aged people and higher have higher turnout, voter turnout than lower, younger people, right? No surprise there. How do we increase voter turnout? This came up in the video. We could have elections on the weekend. We could have voters registered automatically. We could have a national registration system, so you don't have to re-register if you move from state to state. There's lots of different ways we could do this, but since this is a state-by-state situation, this gets messy. Okay, that's your notes. If you look at today's assignment, I'm going to open up voting trends, and eventually it'll open. We want this assignment, make a copy. And it says we're going to use the slides that are linked here to summarize some trends. So we did number 1 for you, so you kind of look at, you can kind of get a sense of what this is supposed to look like. So let me open up the slides. And these are national exit polls from 2020. So exit polls means people leaving the polls, they ask them questions and they collect data from voters. Okay, so if I can make this a little bigger, first one gets at gender and race. Second slide adds in kind of a combination of gender and race, so giving us kind of a different take. Next slide, age and college level of education. Married, yes or no, and then LGBTQ. And you can kind of follow along this. So what it's telling us on each of these slides is what percentage of voters voted for Trump or voted for Biden in the last presidential election. So males more likely voted for Trump, 53%. Females more likely voted for Biden, 57%. So what did we write down for some of the trends that we saw if we talk about gender? Overall, men are more likely to vote for Trump. Overall, women are more likely to vote for Biden. When we get into gender and race, you see some shifts. Black men, much less support for Trump, only 19%. White men, more than the average, 61% support for Trump. Okay, so thinking about gender and how gender plays out, you're going to do the same thing for race and ethnicity. You're going to look for trends. We go through these slides. We're looking for trends. Just what are some of the facts and information that you're noticing, okay, for the way people vote. We'll do that again with age, education, income, residence. If I keep going through slides, there's a slide that talks about where is it? What part of the country you live in and what kind of a place. So city, suburb, or rural. That's the one I think for residents. And then you can pick another demographic group. So demographic groups would be gender, age, race, sexual orientation, education, anything we haven't talked about that you saw in the slides. Another trend. Last 2 questions. What are 2 issues that Trump voters identified as their most important? I think that's on a slide here. Yep, there's a slide that gets into that. And then same thing for Biden. And then last, if you were someone that is going to advise candidates, what pieces of advice would you give them to win the election? So this should be related to demographics. So I would say something like, if you're a Republican, your support from females was significantly less than males. So maybe we should try to address concerns of women if we're Republicans. If we're Democrats, we might say the reverse, right? How do we get more men on board with Democrats? But that's the kind of advice we're looking for, something related to the demographic groups. All right, that was a lot of talking. Good luck. I'll see you on Monday.